So I just finished this herringbone wall for my daughter's room, and I just love how it looks in here. It really adds to her room. Now, this was not quite as easy as I thought it would be. There were some tips and tricks along the way that I'll share with you in this video, so it will hopefully save you from some of the issues that I came across. After purchasing the 1/2 inch MDF from my local hardware store, I brought it home to cut it down. Now, if you're able to get it cut down at your store, I would highly recommend it. They weren't able to do this for me at my store because they don't deal with MDF. So you can see I just kind of set up some of my rolling stands here, and I also have some sawhorses that I set up just to try and provide me an area to deal with this huge sheet of MDF. So I started to cut it here, and it was just really leaning off to that one side. So rather than push it and get not very good cuts and possibly be unsafe, I just had to wait until my husband was free to come out and help me just hold up the one edge so I could cut it down properly. So what I'm doing at this point is I'm just cutting them to 6-inch wide strips. Next, I headed on over to the miter saw, and I set up a stop to make sure that they were all exactly the same length. I cut them to 48 inches long. Now, it's very important that they all end up the same length and the same width. Otherwise, this herringbone pattern is not going to sit correctly, and you just won't make it look right on your wall. So make sure that you pay close attention to these two steps. Next step is to head on over to the router table, and using a 1/4 inch roundover bit, I just rounded over all 4 of the edges on one side. That will be the side that faces out that you see. This is just a minor detail on them, but I'll show you here in a sec how this makes such a big difference in your overall wall. So let me show you the difference here. The top board here has not been routered, so you can barely even see a gap in between them. However, down below here, you can totally see that there is a difference in between the two boards. So when they're painted and on the wall, the top boards that have not been routered may, after painted, just look like a regular wall. They won't stand out like the routered boards will. Now I'm moving on to painting each of the boards. I'm just giving them one coat of paint just to make sure that I'm getting the edges and everything before I put it up on the wall. It's going to be hard for me to paint the inner edges when it's actually on the wall, so this gives me an opportunity to get one solid coat on it all before it's up. Next, I'm moving on to the actual wall, and I'm going to put one coat of paint here just in case there's any gaps in between the boards. I don't want it to stand out by showing that lighter color underneath. Now, the color that I'm using is Sherwin Peppercorn at a 50%. So that just means it's going to be lighter than the actual peppercorn paint. Now I'm just pre-measuring and marking the wall so I know where to put the boards. So I find the middle of the wall first, and then I'm actually marking on each side of that middle line where the board should go. So the middle line should line up with the middle of the section, and then it will have a right side and a left side where that board lines up, and I'm going to put those lines on as well. So I just used a level just to make sure that that line was going straight up and down my wall. Next, I went along and marked all the studs on the wall using my stud finder and painter's tape just to mark where it is. I will use my stud finder each time I'm putting in nails, but this will just give me an idea of where they are, so I'm not having to really hunt for it every single time. Because I'm not using adhesive to hold these boards to the wall, I want to make sure that my nails are going into the studs. I chose not to use wall adhesive just in case I ever want to take this wall down. I don't want it to ruin the drywall behind. All right, so here I am. I'm starting with the boards, and you can see lightly there my 3 lines on the wall. So I'm just lining up the corner with the far line and using my square there just to make sure that my angle is correct. And once everything is lined up, I am just nailing it in to the studs. All right, I'm thinking at this point that, hey, I've figured this out, things are going great, and look at me go. Ignorance is bliss in this case, because I just continue along using that line, thinking that everything is great. You just wait a second here. You'll see it is not so great. So when I take the board that will be lining up next and put it there, do you see right there, there is an overhang, and this overhang is going to be too big for me to keep the pattern going. I'm realizing that this project's going to be a little trickier than I thought, and I had to remove all these boards that I just put up. Now, this time, same process, I line it up with that line, but I have a scrap piece I'm using every time just to make sure that it's lined up correctly for the next board that will go. So just keep a scrap piece handy so that you can use it just as a guide there to make sure that you're leaving the correct amount of space. Now with these vertical boards going up this direction, it worked out really well for me to do one on each side and just go back and forth with this pattern. Now I'm to the area where I can't use full boards. So I'm cutting 45s here on some of these to get them to fit in correct. And again, using my spacer just to make sure that I have everything lined up right where it should be, allowing enough room for the next board. So this is where the time-consuming part is. I would measure each side to see where I needed to cut the boards and then head out to the shop to cut 2 boards. Then coming back in, a lot of times the cuts would be just a hair off, but enough that if I didn't go out and trim that off, it was going to throw off the pattern in the future. Now, I am a little bit of a perfectionist, so if you're okay with little gaps here and there, you may not have as many trips out to the shop as me. So I ended up doing this whole section all the way down, mainly because the next boards that line up to the right of it there, if I start up and work down on those boards, I have the potential to pinch the boards in too tight where the next board down won't be able to fit because of the width being too small. I hope that makes sense. So with these boards, I need to actually move down on the bottom to up just to make sure that I'm getting them lined up correctly. Again, I hope that makes sense. There's just a lot of things to think through with this pattern of which direction you want to go so that you're not pinching your boards and potentially making your cuts not line up. Now, got a little tricky here around the outlet. I just had to cut the board and then mark and measure where I needed to cut around to make sure that that outlet fit. And here I'm just using that inexpensive multi-tool that you've seen me use before. I'll make sure to put it in the description down below, but it is just such a handy thing just to give me that little cut that I need to allow room for the outlet. So as much as I would like to say that I'm perfect and I lined everything up correctly, that is so not true. So here I am pulling out this board here that looks so perfect, but it's just a little too long. And if I don't pull it out and fix it, the boards that line up will have a big gap in them. So I just have to run out cut it down. I had to use the router over that edge one more time and put on some touch-up paint so that it looks like it's ready to go. Now to cut these, I measured from the bottom how much I needed to cut off. Then I take down the board and I actually measure that same amount down from the top where I need to cut. And I draw a line so when I get out to the shop, I know which direction I want to make the cut. Then I just repeat that same process for the other side. So now I'm just going through with a new product that I found to patch up all the holes. Another learning here, I thought this product was going to be so great because it does not require sanding. However, I would highly suggest that you actually sand it down. I'll show you why after all this. And now here I am taping, getting ready to paint all the boards. Now, in order to get close to the sides there, I'm using just a piece of cardboard to hold in between the wall to make sure that I'm not getting the paint over. And this actually worked pretty well. I ended up having two very small areas where I think I just wasn't holding the cardboard right, and it ended up seeping through, and there's just those two areas that I'll have to go back and touch up. And here I am just going along using a roller and going along each of the boards. After turning off the power, I used an electric box extender to bring the outlet out a 1/2 inch. Because they never seemed to fit tight against the wall, I used the plastic part of a Bic pen to hold the extender tight to the wall. I just cut it the length that I needed, and then I threaded that screw through the middle. Now, I am not an electrician, so please do not take my word for any of these parts. You should definitely get an expert if you are doing anything of this sort. I just wanted to share with you the tips and tricks that I used to bring my outlet out from the wall. I wanted to point out one of the issues that I came across here. So the areas where I patched the nail holes, you can somewhat see them when the light shines on them just a certain way. And I think the main issue I have here is that the MDF took the paint different than the area where the patch is. I also think I should have sanded where I put over the patch, even though it said I didn't need to. But I would recommend you try primering the boards and doing a primer over the patch before you paint these boards, just so that it will take the paint evenly and you won't see those marks. Other than the paint that I will need to redo at a later date, I am really happy with how it turned out. I will say that it took a lot more effort and took a lot more hours than I expected. So just be prepared that this type of accent wall is going to take you quite a while just to get all those cuts fit correctly and to make sure that you have the pattern going in the right directions that you need. It's just something that you really need to think through. Other than that, you're good to go. I'll see you on the next video.